Hello. I am thrilled to be attending Front with all of you today and tomorrow. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Danielle Green. I am the manager of research and experimentation at a local company called Jane.com. And before I jump in to the content today, I thought I'd give you a little blurb about my journey to becoming a dedicated researcher, because a lot of people ask me about it. Like, how did you get here? So my academic background is actually in cognitive neuroscience. I used to do this, EEG. Yeah, you thought you had cable management problems? Thanks for laughing. As a cognitive scientist, my research focused on how different types of digital interface affect thinking and decision making. So now you know, like, that leads very naturally into user experience research. And the rest is history. I've had a lot of experiences. I've worked at a lot of different sizes of companies. And I'm going to share with you some of my observations today during all of that. I've tried to kind of boil down these concepts to their fundamentals so that they're easy for you to go back and apply to your context. So the topic today is UX and product research as a business scales. And this comes from the most common question that I get from my network, which is, what does a good research process even look like? There are a lot of blog posts and resources and opinions out there. My opinion is that there's no magic research, organizational structure, or tool, or skill set that works for every business. So when I talk about my experiences, you'll likely have tried some of the things that I'm going to share with you, and maybe they didn't work out for you guys. And that's okay. I'm just going to give you some of these tidbits as I see them, just to get you thinking. Okay, so the whole point that I'm trying to make here today, spoilers, is that effective research looks different depending on the stage of the business that you're in. So I see it in your faces. You think this is a no-brainer. But folks, look at how our industry operates. There are all of these like silver bullet approaches that you hear about to product and UX. And guess what? They were all created at like large corporate enterprise situations, and usually created for those same situations. Doesn't mean some of these don't transfer over, but I think that we don't bring up this point enough, that some of these processes are actually more conducive depending on the stage that you're in as a biz. Okay, so first I'm going to share with you some of my recent experiences at Jane. And this is to give you a little bit of context. So I'm going to tell you about the entire product organization at Jane, and then I'm going to try to zoom in to my little slice, which is research. Next, we're going to look at what research typically looks like at these different stages of business. And then finally, I'm going to give you a couple of tips to ponder depending on what stage you're at, whether you need to level up or transition in a couple of areas. Okay, so let's begin. First, let me give you an idea of what happened at Jane. So Jane's a Utah-based company. We are an e-commerce platform where small independent brands and boutiques across the country come and sell their wares on our site and our app. There's like the standard B2C component of the business, and then we also have that B2B slice of the business because we're providing tools and systems for our sellers. Jane has an amazing origin story. I could seriously go on about it all day, but in a sentence, it's like fast growth, no external funding, and just whew. So when I arrived on Jane, we were a machine, a well-oiled product machine. We had everything. product experience teams, agile coaches, lean philosophy, all the cool tools, industry standard, whatever, best practices, you name it, we had it all. And we were this whirring, awesome product machine. And I don't know if you remember this scene in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. But here's this machine is spinning and it's cooking and like there's hands pounding at flour or something. And it looks very complex and Wonka's dancing around and he's telling you about how revolutionary this candy is going to be. And there's even a component of this machine where a hive of bees are producing little drops of honey. Very complex stuff. And finally, all this excitement, all this buildup, the machine, boop, out pops a little piece of gum. So this is how we were feeling at Jane. All this effort, all this coolness, and producing the occasional piece of gum, which, if you recall, was not optimal. It turned a girl into a blueberry. I am sure that didn't pass through QA. So we didn't get it. Why? You guys, we did everything. We followed all of the rules. We did all of the things. We read all the blogs and the books, but we just weren't producing. So we did something drastic. We pressed pause. That's what we called it. We stopped the entire product process at Jane. So engineers worked on tech debt and all the things that they never thought they were going to ever get to work on. And product worked very closely with executives to figure out what was going on. And our goal was to create an environment where we could be successful, to create effective practices for Jane. And like, I know what you're thinking, okay, like a week-long workshop, like an offsite. No. Months. We paused for months. Think about that for a minute. Pausing a department for months. And all we did, we put product, UX, and executive leadership in a room, and all we did was think about this problem. And we learned a lot, as you can imagine. So, not all of you in this room have the gift of executives who are willing to press pause on an entire department. So I thought I'd share with you some of the main insights that we found from this experience. One of the key takeaways, at each stage of the business, in a business's developmental cycle, there are different needs. Different needs. Effectively, when we think about each stage of business, these are entirely different systems. They have different success criteria. The ideal outcomes are different. The approach we take and the process that we apply has to be different. So perhaps some of you can relate. We made the mistake of applying enterprise scale process and best practices to a small, medium business. And this looked like all of those cool things that I told you about. And one of those things was this concept of, that I think is a really good example. It's this concept of autonomous product teams. So first of all, I don't think the word autonomy is a very good word to describe product, except at very large organizations. Like an ideal product team at a small biz being autonomous scares me a little bit. You don't hear marketing saying that they want to be autonomous. That's AI. You don't hear about autonomous sales teams. So why is product any different? We are members of the team. And I've watched a lot of folks kind of hold this autonomy word take it out of context. You know, we want trust, we want empowerment, but pulling the word autonomy out of that context that it was originally situated in and using it as a weapon. My team is not autonomous, and not collaborating across departments. So this is just one example of how when you hold a small business to the standards and the best practices of a large business, it's just chaos, and it leads to a lot of employee dissatisfaction. So our practices and our systems, our situation, our reality, were misaligned. So we went through some steps to get ourselves back on track, a track that actually made sense for us. We realized that Jane as a business had moved from small to medium right under our noses. And we had naturally, kind of unconsciously reacted by applying all of these new snazzy practices. And these practices were geared for a large business, so we continued to have misalignment. So what we needed to do, what we ended up doing in those months, is we identified explicitly, very clearly, what were the current practices we were using. And then we mapped those practices to business needs. And there were a lot of gaps. So we filled in those gaps with new working agreements and clearly labeled expectations across the board. This looked like, what does your stakeholder expect you to deliver to them? If you don't know what that expectation is, then how can you meet the expectation? And finally, we just were rebuilding our concept of reality. There were some of us who had been there for a year, and there were some of us who had been there for 5 years. And what they had learned in the past that worked, let's just say they had approached a task, and the approach had failed. So they learned not to use that approach anymore. But this was a new game, new set of rules. And the failed approach over here was actually producing results in the new reality. So we had to just rebuild our entire concept of what worked. Okay, whew. A lot. I could talk about that all day, by the way. Come find me later. So that was the Jane product organization. And I want to zoom into my world a little bit, the research team. So in my experience, research process is a really good indicator of whether your overall product UX practices are out of alignment with reality. Because let's face it, it's the first thing to change or the last thing to change as you scale. So I'm going to show you here a little framework, and I want you to think about how you're currently operating as a business. I want you to map your practices on this cheat sheet here, and then start to think about how you may be misaligned, how what you're doing and how you're behaving, what your process looks like, is misaligned with the needs of the business. Okay, and we're just gonna think about this in terms of research. So I have this set of aspects of research. And this little exercise is just meant to get you thinking. So I've been intentionally vague with a lot of these things. Small, medium, and large, very vague. I don't want anyone going home and telling their CEO that because they're precisely 2 years old, now they can't do usability testing anymore. So we're gonna be vague. And we're also gonna talk about some extreme cases. So what I'm gonna put up here is not ideal. It's just kind of what I see when I talk to folks in the Valley. Like, they share with me their experiences, and I see a couple patterns, so I'm just gonna show them here. So when it comes to methods, let's think about the small section, the small stage. Methods are scrappy. They're usually unstructured, qualitative, convenience sample, interviews with friends. I call this walkthroughs. We call it usability testing to other folks, but it's really like when you demo your product to somebody, a friend or someone you found on the street. And this is kind of what we do when it's small. For the low price of $0, because that's about what you have in terms of resources when you're super small. Next, roles. You have very little time on top of everything else. Because you have few people and they're wearing many hats, that means people are doing the research, and they also have like 7 other jobs, right? PM, UX, front end, researcher. Could all be the same person. This has pros and cons. I heard laughter, someone feels this. This has pros and cons, such as with communication. So communication, if you do the research and you're also the engineer who's gonna go make the changes, communication starts to feel pretty easy. That's really great. There tends to be a direct link from insights to impact here. So you just, whatever, tell the one other person in the business who cares about the results, and the 2 of you act upon those insights, and you're on your way. The trickiest part of being in the small category is the perception of research. It's often your biggest challenge. Research is seen as slow and costly to the business, to somebody in the business, usually somebody who has your budget. And you're constantly trying to justify the need for research. You're also constantly trying to prioritize research with all of your other tasks, right? Because you're wearing many hats. Finally, your scope. Your scope is whatever you want it to be, because you're also the marketing director, or what have you. It looks like a lot of the times a project-by-project approach, where you're just doing enough research to get your project off the ground, but a lot of the times you'll end up doing competitive or market research and usability testing, because all the research needs to be done, and you're the person to do it. So that's what we call small here. So take a moment and think about, like, which of these are you? Which of these are you in your team? Let's talk about medium. Okay, so methods. You're starting to diversify. Adding a little bit of rigor. There's a couple of templates hanging around now. We're getting pro at this. More systematic approaches to testing, typically. You're probably still using a few tried and true methods, but you've nailed it. Next, resources. You're starting to be able to justify things. Maybe you get a specialized tool just for research, maybe. The business is starting to see the monetary value of research, or at least they're convincible when they're in the right mood. Then we have roles. So this is an interesting one. You're starting to mix the generalists that came from the small world to the newly hired specialists, and they're all trying to play together. And this can cause friction, but it can also be a really productive environment where you have people with different types of skill sets working together. So that's always an interesting one. Next is communication. This is the challenging piece for the medium stage, in my opinion. It's becoming increasingly difficult for you to just go tell everybody what you found. You're sending out maybe reports, decks to everybody, and people are offended because you're spamming them, and they don't read them, and then people are offended because you didn't include them in the email. So you don't know who needs to know what. And this is the most challenging piece of this, which I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Next is perception. Okay, interestingly, I've found at this stage of business, there comes a time when all of a sudden stakeholders get on board with this whole research thing. And sometimes it can actually become overwhelming, the stream of requests, because you can answer questions now. And the enthusiasm is really good, but it's really just like, tell us the answers of everything. So that can happen as well. Scope. Your scope starts to become more defined, but I say up here, limited boundaries. This means you can be pressured into scope creep all over the place. The fact is the business still has a lot of needs around research. You may not have all of those specialists to meet those needs. So people will tell you, oh yeah, you're a product researcher, but then they'll keep making market research requests of you. And you'll be like, So that's kind of what scope looks like for medium. Okay, small, medium, you're checking where you're at here. Large, methods, detailed, we're doing interesting things. We know what a card sort is now, and we've done one, and we're using all of those fun things that we find in the blog posts and lots of rigor, templates and protocols, right? Resources. We start to get into an interesting space here where businesses can overspend if they're not careful about redundancy over time. So you did a project 6 months ago, you're doing it again now because you couldn't find the report, or Team A is doing research, Team B is doing research, you find out that you're doing the same research. So you can fall into overspending there as a result of silos and whatnot. Next, the majority of team members are specialists in a large business. Lots of potential for repeat roles. And this is where the autonomy thing, those autonomous units, start to make more sense to maximize the output. Communication can feel completely impossible if you're talking about widespread communication. So typically it contracts back down just to the team. So this can create a sense of, I'm doing this work over here and you don't know about it, and this team's doing this work over here and you don't know about it. Once again, having that bridge being a problem. And then for perception, research becomes a formalized part of the process. So sometimes you fall into this odd little problem where you're doing research just for the sake of doing research, like it's a checkbox along the path, and you're not thinking critically, and so you're spending resources or time just because it's a part of a formalized process. Finally, scope. With all the specialists available, the scope of work can become very narrow. Depth replaces breadth. So you can have one person just doing usability tests, and that's it. All right. So here is the spread. And you're mapping yourself onto this, and your team and your practices. And you can also think about, like, where is your business right now? Does it fall into small, medium, or large? So where's that alignment of, like, you've gone too far over here, you're wearing a suit that's too big for you, or do you need to level up, pull some of these aspects into the next column? So the more spread out you are across this, the more likely it is that your practices don't really align with reality. So a couple of tips from me for transitioning, if you need to take some of these boxes from small to medium or medium to large. Going from small to medium. Scrappy, $0, a little bit rigorous, medium. Consider a few things. First, shame is the enemy, you guys, when it comes to research. Yeah. When we give in to shame, we stop allowing the business to make informed choices. This means that when you are doing research and you're not recording it because you're kind of nervous that you might be asking a leading question, and then someone's going to watch that and then tell you that you were asking a leading question, and then all of your results are suddenly flawed and nobody wants to listen to you, that's shame. And getting over that as a culture is one of the nicest ways to move from small to medium. So transparency makes up for that bias. You give the business all of the information so that they can say, actually, we don't mind that you asked a couple of leading questions because this mitigates the risk in this project. Or they can go back and say, you need to redo or you need to collect some more participants. And so you do. Win-win. Next, you may need to change your hiring strategy. This is one of those flags of like, hey, you may be misaligned if you open all of these recs and then you are interviewing for 6 months and you just can't find the right person. And gosh, they're good. They're all good, but they're just not quite a right fit. And actually, is this what we need? I'm not sure. And those recs sit on the market forever. is usually because you think you're still small or you think you're still medium, and the business has transitioned. So you're trying to hire with this strategy, and it's just not quite working because you really need this reality. So look at your hiring strategy for some of these things. Next, when it comes to small and medium, tools can fill in a lot of these gaps. At Jane, we have a research tool called Alpha that's this rapid research platform. You send them a question, they send back the answer in 3 days. It's amazing. We couldn't possibly get that quick of a turnaround with our internal resources. So it was able to level us up in a lot of ways. Okay, there's your tips from small to medium. Now let's talk medium to large, moving from this bucket over to the other. Consider effective communication is that key to saving resources and preventing redundancy. So one thing that I like to think about is like there's a push model where you're going and you're telling everybody all about the research, and then there's a pull model where you're expecting everyone to come and get those insights from you. And the way I've sort of reconciled this is I will try to form a research committee, which is a person from each department as you scale, whose job it is, they meet once a month or something, and they are your little advocates who go and pull those insights back to the teams. So then you're just pushing to this one layer, and it's their job to go and apply it to their context. So that's a good way to just like jumpstart your communication from medium to large. Next, the generalists have to adjust. And that looks like a lot of things. They could get a different role as a team lead, or maybe they need to work on their depth of a certain skill set. But that's something that needs to happen. You need to have those conversations as you're moving from medium to large. Finally, scope is different from power. And I'm saying this because as you move from medium to large, your scope is going to go like this. And it's going to feel like you're becoming disempowered. It's going to feel like you don't have an impact anymore because your scope is narrowing. But trust me, you can still have a phenomenal impact, maybe even more so than you ever did now that your attention isn't divided, with a very defined scope. So don't be afraid of that as that happens. My last piece of advice for you is to remember that changes like this are like building a house. You know you want a place to live. You can visualize what a house looks like. But when you build a house, you don't start with a tiny house with tiny windows and a tiny door and tiny little shingles on the roof. You start with a big hole in the ground and concrete and posts, and it's a lot of effort, and none of it feels like a house when you're building it. You're looking around, you want to go back to the drawing board, you want to fire the construction company. None of this is a house. So it's not going to look like a house. But if you keep applying the effort, you know what a house looks like. So if you trust yourself and keep applying the effort, you will get to the point where this thing becomes a house. And as we all know, for anyone who's ever built or bought a house, you're going to change something over and over and over again because the needs of your life change. And so your environment will adjust to that. So don't be afraid to build your house. Thank you.
Okay, so Carlos asks, how was the process for mapping research practices to business needs and objectives? Did you start with the needs first?
We started with what are we doing now? Because it helped us. It's an easier conversation to have. Honestly, this is a very daunting thing. So we just started talking about what are we all doing right now? Typically, none of that's documented. So we started documenting that. Like, how is research behaving? And it felt kind of anti-agile and kind of gross and all that with all this documentation. But it helped us be really clear about what was happening when and start speaking the same language. I've heard a couple people talk about just speaking the same language sometimes is half the battle. So we started with documenting our current processes, and then we had that, and we looked at it and started mapping, well, where are business needs being met? What's working, pretty much? What's not working?
Okay. Perfect. How did you go about rebuilding people's concepts of reality?
I don't know that we're there yet. It was actually a realization that one of our designers had in a meeting, and he'd been there a long time, and he realized that his concept of what Jane wasn't holding true anymore, and the way he expected things to behave weren't happening anymore. So that was like a ding for all of us as we realized that it may just be that we're expecting, as you would, a rational being, past experiences, you use them to help you in the future, but that we couldn't be so sure about that anymore. So we just had some open conversations about that. I can't imagine that will be easy for every team, but that's what we did.
Cool. Cameron asks, what is an example of this experience of a current practice and the business needs or objectives as it was mapped to?
A current practice and the business needs that it was mapped to.
An example.
Okay. A lot of the business needs, to make it concrete, because that's what I'm hearing, is like, that's kind of vague, Danielle. A lot of the business needs were about different stakeholder groups needing things from product to make decisions or to get things done or to feel good about something. So a lot of it was about, we're behaving this way. We're delivering, let's just say, to leadership, we're delivering this type of roadmap. But what they really need to make decisions is something with a different level of detail or a different document, a different deliverable. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying practices aligns with business needs. It's just kind of like, what do these different groups need, and are you providing it now, and how could you provide it in the future?
Okay, cool. Alana asks, what is the most impactful difference between small and medium-sized companies? It'd be great to learn more about what about the diagrams on that slide. So what would you consider is like the most impactful differences between the sizes?
So maybe what qualifies a business as fitting into one of those categories, or
Yeah, I would say something similar to that.
well, I'm intentionally being vague because you're going to have to go home and do the work to apply some of this. So I didn't qualify anything as like, this is what happens in a startup between 0 and 9 months or anything like that. I didn't do that on purpose. So
Okay.
dodge it.
Last question. So Matt Thomas asks, if you don't have a culture of research, how do you create that culture?
I'm going to sound like a blind idealist for a minute. I think everyone kind of has a culture of research. It's just how people like to talk about research. And this is particularly difficult with qualitative research, but let's just talk about all research in general for a moment. You work in a business. The business wants to make low-risk, high-value decisions. Guess what research does? Enable them to do that in a more informed way. You're mitigating risk. So all businesses want that. So everybody has a culture of research, you just don't know it yet.
That's perfect. Okay, let's give Danielle one more round of applause. Thank you.